How is it that America appears to be in such a rapid decline? How is it that Twitter allows racism against a sitting Republican senator who's black, but bans President Trump indefinitely from their woke and unfair platform? How is it that the biased press is so corrupt that it excuses open racism and unfairness when perpetrated by liberals? How is it that the FBI classifies an attempted assassination of Republican lawmakers as a suicide by cop? How is it that same FBI raids Rudy Giuliani's home to take electronic devices, but didn't want anything to do with Hunter Biden's hard drive, a hard drive that Rudy has in his possession? How does all of this and everything else that's going wrong, how does it happen? We have identified some of the culprits, you and me, or at least our money. Because we have allowed our elected officials to run all over us, because we allowed them to steal our money to fund an unaccountable government-run education system, and then we allowed them to pass laws and edicts in the various states to prevent us from holding GovEd accountable. This apathy toward what's being taught to our kids may have just cost us our country, because these government institutions are cranking out anti-American, lawless, hate-filled socialists who denigrate our country and cheer for our enemies. Now, there's only one way to reverse this damage: school choice. Its time has come. That's the wake-up call we give to all parents, grandparents, and anyone who loves America in tonight's preamble. Earlier this week, The Federalist published an expose on Carroll ISD in Texas. It is the highest achieving district in that conservative state. Now, that's important. The reason why it's important is because if unaccountable GovEd can get away with the crap they're getting away with in Texas, imagine what they're doing in California, Illinois, and New York. The teaching of critical race theory, or whatever they're calling it in your school district, is the teaching of taxpayer-funded hate. White kids are being taught to hate their own heritage and skin color, and brown kids like mine and black kids are being taught to hate whites. Let me introduce you to the assistant principal of Carroll High School in Texas. Her name is Renee James. This is a screen capture allegedly taken off of James' Twitter page, a post that local activists say proves she's up to no good inside the government-run schools. It reads, quote, "Be careful. I will decenter whiteness and abolish hatred in my space. My culture matters. I am willing to teach all day," end quote. Now, there are a lot of things we just learned about Josephine Renee James from that one post. We learned about her animus toward whiteness. She also appears to associate hate with whiteness. She also says her culture matters, but doesn't say anything about other people's cultures like whites or Latinos' cultures. She also claims to be a teacher. That's a scary thought. Real teachers are being coerced into teaching a hate whitey program. Many of them are sneaking out information to us in the pro-American media. We have audio from the Wise Guys Talks podcast. The teacher who secretly recorded it says it's Renee James, telling teachers how they will implement into their classrooms critical race theory, or the Cultural Competence Action Plan, as they call it in Carroll ISD.
But we must have the conversation. We're going to have the conversation. Our conversation will be filtered through a lens of equity. So let's talk about this lens of equities. Equity issues are present in every situation of our life. This is the nature of living in a society in which systems of oppressions are embedded in the mindsets of people and their behaviors and in institutions. It becomes invisible and becomes normal. That's how it becomes institutional. It becomes culture. That is why we need a shock. We need a shock to our culture. We need a shock to our world. So what we have created is a rubric.
How many of you are paying taxes to your schools so that activist educrats can shock the world? Now, I thought we were supposed to be paying them to teach our kids to read, to write, to do math and the sciences, not working to turn our children into anti-freedom left-wing activists. But what is the equity filter and rubric that was mentioned in that audio clip? Well, here are some of the slides these teachers were reportedly forced to endure. Slide number 1 is called white privilege. White privilege is being able to navigate daily life in the American culture without having to think about race. Wait, in America, we're not supposed to see race. We're not supposed to be centered on race. We're supposed to see another human being, our fellow Americans. Well, not anymore. The left is now hyper-focused on race. The next slide deals with something called white identity, and it encourages teachers to talk with a neighbor about their white identity. I guess that's so you can convince your neighbor that their skin color defines them. The next slide deals with white fragility. I'm sensing a pattern here. This slide is meant to shame whites because of the color of their skin, much the same way Democrat Jim Crow South did to blacks. And lastly, the good old reliable slur, white supremacy, a concept that only a few ignorant people among us believe in. But liberals are trying to convince you that if you have white skin, that automatically makes you a white supremacist. According to the Federalist, under critical race theory, teachers and administrators who choose to treat students, parents, and colleagues equally, regardless of their skin color or ethnicity, were accused of, quote, cultural blindness, a state in which differences were ignored and one proceeds as if differences don't exist. In other words, if you treat everybody the same, you're a racist. This moronic view was reinforced during a culturally competent professional development session that was held on September 9th, 2020 for Carroll ISD and their staff. The conclusion was filthy and frightening. If we show mutual respect to one another by striving to treat all people equally regardless of skin color, that is considered a negative behavior that teachers should shun. Now, if you're yelling at your TV right now saying, Chris, this sounds like Gov Ed is teaching racism to our teachers and our kids, you would be correct. Your tax dollars are funding racism against whites with the full blessings of Joe Biden and socialist Democrats. Chris Salcedo Show believes that teaching racism against anybody is wrong. We believe that the people who are pushing critical race theory are degenerates who seek the ruin of our nation and the unity that we have worked so hard to build. Any politician, so-called educator or parent who endorses critical race theory stands opposed to the Chris Salcedo Show and this man, the great Dr. Martin Luther King. He told our nation that he had a dream. He said, quote, I have a dream that one day my 4 little children will live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character, end quote. The United States has already done so much work to make Dr. King's vision come true. But it's all under threat now because we, the people, have lost the power to hold government education accountable. American parents deserve school choice, and we deserve it now. Because if we allow the pushers of critical race theory to succeed, Dr. King's dream dies, as does America.
You just watched Newsmax TV, America's fastest growing cable news channel, now in more than 70 million homes. You can get Newsmax TV on your cable system or check your cable guide. And if your system doesn't carry Newsmax, call them, tell them you want Newsmax TV, because we're real news for real people.